Jake Morrison stood at the center of the Great Hall on Nexus Prime, his voice carrying across the massive chamber filled with representatives from dozens of alien species. The human ambassador wore his simple blue uniform, a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial robes and biomodifications of the other delegates. Behind him, Lisa Parker organized the holographic displays showing Earth's latest technological innovations. "Distinguished members of the Galactic Council," Jake began, his words automatically translated into hundreds of languages and communication methods. "Humanity is proud to present these advances in fusion technology and interstellar communication systems." The Zephyrians listened with their large, multifaceted eyes reflecting the light from the displays. Their leader, Council Chairman Veltar, nodded approvingly as Jake explained how the new fusion reactors could power entire worlds with minimal environmental impact. The Korathi delegates, tall and muscular with their distinctive ridge-covered foreheads, whispered among themselves in their guttural language. War Commander Thexal seemed particularly interested in the defensive applications of the technology. The Vextai collective representatives remained silent, their pale, elongated forms connected through bio-neural links that allowed them to share thoughts instantly. Hive mind Zaraneth observed everything through dozens of eyes, processing information at speeds that would overwhelm most organic minds. Even the peaceful Aquarians, with their blue-scaled skin and gentle demeanor, watched intently as Elder Finney took detailed notes. Jake had given countless presentations like this over the past 5 years since humanity had joined the Galactic Council. Each time, he marveled at how different species could work together despite their vastly different biologies and cultures. It was something humans seemed to understand instinctively, this ability to find common ground between opposing viewpoints. The reactor designs are freely available to all council members, Jake continued, gesturing to Lisa, who activated another display. "We believe that shared technology benefits everyone." The statement caused a stir among the delegates. The Korathi had a long tradition of keeping military technology secret. The Vextai viewed knowledge as a resource to be carefully managed. Even the Zephyrians, despite their democratic ideals, typically charged licensing fees for their innovations. The humans always shared their discoveries, asking only for similar openness in return. Dr. Kolorin, the Zephyrian scientist sitting in the front row, leaned forward with interest. He had worked with human researchers for years and never ceased to be amazed by their approach to problem-solving. While other species specialized in narrow fields, humans seemed to excel at seeing connections between different areas of knowledge. They were natural bridge builders, both literally and metaphorically. As Jake finished his presentation, the usual question period began. Admiral Grixton of the Korathi asked about potential military applications, his scarred face showing the results of countless battles. Jake answered honestly, explaining both the benefits and dangers of the technology. This transparency was typically human, much to the frustration of some delegates who preferred more secretive negotiations. The Aquarian representative, General Tolmas, inquired about environmental safeguards. Despite being a military leader, he showed the typical Aquarian concern for ecological balance. Jake's response demonstrated the careful environmental testing humans had conducted, sharing data that would have taken other species years to compile. Hive mind Zaraneth communicated through bio-neural pulses, asking about the social implications of widespread fusion power. Jake's answer revealed the depth of human planning, showing how they had considered not just the technical aspects but the broader effects on galactic society. The session continued for hours, with Jake and Lisa fielding questions from dozens of species. Each answer revealed another layer of human thoroughness, their ability to anticipate problems and develop solutions that worked for everyone. They had become the galaxy's unofficial mediators, the ones other species turned to when disputes arose. As the formal session ended, delegates began to cluster in small groups, discussing the implications of the new technology. Jake noticed the familiar pattern, different species naturally gravitating toward their own kind. The Korathi grouped together, discussing military strategies. The Vexti formed their bio-neural networks. The Zephyrians debated democratic procedures for technology adoption, but Jake also saw something else, something that gave him hope. Here and there, mixed groups formed around human delegates. A Korathi engineer talked excitedly with a Zephyrian researcher about fusion applications. An Aquarian diplomat shared environmental concerns with a Vexti bioengineer. Humans seemed to act as natural catalysts, bringing together species that might otherwise remain isolated. Lisa approached him as the crowd began to thin. "Another successful presentation," she said, her smile reflecting the satisfaction of a job well done. "I think we've got several species interested in joint research projects." Jake nodded, watching as the last delegates filed out of the chamber. "It's what we do best," he replied. Finding ways for everyone to work together outside the Great Hall, the business of the galaxy continued. Nexus Prime hummed with activity as beings from hundreds of worlds conducted trade, negotiated treaties, and shared knowledge. The space station served as the heart of galactic civilization, a place where differences could be set aside in favor of cooperation. In the human quarters, Jake and Lisa prepared their report for Earth. The message would travel through the quantum communication network humanity had helped establish, reaching the home planet in minutes rather than the years it would have taken with conventional faster-than-light travel. Neither of them knew this would be their last report. The next morning, Jake awoke to silence. The usual bustle of activity outside his quarters had stopped. No footsteps in the corridors, no alien voices discussing the day's agenda. Even the constant hum of the station's system seemed muted. He dressed quickly and made his way to the human delegation's meeting room. Lisa was already there, trying to contact other human representatives throughout the station. Her face was pale with concern. "I can't reach anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The other human delegates, the technical staff, even the maintenance crews. "Nobody's responding." Jake activated his communicator and tried to contact the human embassy on Nexus Prime. Static filled the channel. He tried Earth directly, then the human colonies, then the research stations. Nothing but silence answered his calls. A chill ran down his spine as he realized what might be happening. He and Lisa rushed to the main communications center, where they found alien technicians frantically working at their stations. The Zephyrian operator Polek looked up as they approached. "We've lost contact with all human territories," Polek announced, his multiple eyes reflecting genuine concern. "Every human settlement, every ship, every outpost. They're just, gone." Jake felt the weight of impossibility settling on his shoulders. How could an entire species simply vanish? Where had they gone? And why had he and Lisa been left behind? The answer to that last question would remain a mystery, but Jake and Lisa would spend their remaining days trying to understand what had happened to their people. They would be the last humans the galaxy would ever see, the final witnesses to a civilization that had quietly held the universe together. 6 months had passed since the humans vanished, and the galaxy was celebrating. War Commander Thexal stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as Korathi forces occupied the former human colony of New Terra. The empty cities stretched out. Below him, their streets silent and their buildings intact. No signs of struggle, no evidence of evacuation. The humans had simply stopped existing. "Commander," his aide reported, "the occupation is complete. All human territories in this sector are now under Korathi control." Thexal nodded with satisfaction. The Korathi Empire had always coveted human space, especially the resource-rich systems near the galactic core. For years, they had been forced to negotiate with human diplomats who somehow always found ways to limit Korathi expansion. Now, with the humans gone, nothing stood in their way. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. The Vexti Collective had claimed the former human research stations, their bioships attaching to the abandoned structures like parasites. Hive mind Zaraneth saw opportunity in the empty laboratories and advanced equipment left behind. The humans had been developing technologies that could enhance the collective's bio-neural networks. Even the peaceful Aquarian Republic had quietly begun redistributing human trade routes. Elder Finney justified it as a necessity for Galactic stability, but privately, many Aquarians were relieved. The humans had been uncomfortably idealistic, always pushing for environmental protections and workers' rights that complicated profitable trade agreements. The Zephyrians had been more cautious. Council Chairman Veltar had ordered investigation teams to every human territory, hoping to understand what had happened. But, as weeks turned to months with no answers, even they began to see the humans' disappearance as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. Dr. Colleran was one of the few who remained troubled by the situation. He had worked closely with human scientists and knew they wouldn't simply abandon their research. In his laboratory on Nexus Prime, he studied the data from human territories, looking for clues that others had missed. The evidence was disturbing. On New Terra, meals had been left half-eaten, with food still warm when the first investigation teams arrived. On the research station orbiting Kepler 442, experiments were still running, their automated systems continuing work that their creators would never complete. Human ships drifted through space in perfect formation, their crews vanished, but their systems functioning normally. "It's as if they were erased," Dr. Colleran muttered to himself, reviewing the data for the 100th time. "Not killed, not evacuated. Just ... removed." His concerns were shared by few others. The galaxy had quickly adapted to life without humans, and most species found it remarkably easy. Trade continued, though it was more complicated without human translators and mediators. Conflicts arose more frequently, but they were handled through traditional diplomatic channels, or simply ignored until they resolved themselves, but problems began to surface. The first sign came from the fusion reactors that powered dozens of worlds. These had been human-designed, based on principles that seemed simple enough. Other species had operated them for years without issue. Yet now, without human maintenance, the reactors began showing strange instabilities. Admiral Grixton faced this problem firsthand when the main power plant on his homeworld of Korath Prime started experiencing fluctuations. Korathi engineers had studied the human designs extensively, but they couldn't understand why the reactors were failing. The technology seemed straightforward, yet something crucial was missing. "Get me the human technical manuals," Grixton ordered. His chief engineer, "Sir, we've studied those extensively." "The problem isn't in the manuals. It's something else, something the humans knew but never wrote down." Similar problems emerged across the galaxy. The Vextai discovered that human biocompatibility chambers, which had allowed different species to work together safely, were breaking down. The delicate balance of atmospheric gases and biological filters required constant adjustment, but the collective's engineers couldn't replicate the subtle touches that human technicians had provided. The Aquarians found their food distribution networks failing. Human logistics experts had optimized these systems to account for the dietary needs and cultural preferences of dozens of species. Without their oversight, shipments of Korathi protein supplements were being sent to herbivorous Zephyrian colonies, while Aquarian kelp farms were producing varieties that other species found inedible. Dr. Colleran began to see a pattern emerging. The humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been its connective tissue, the ones who understood how different species could work together. Their disappearance was like removing a crucial component from a complex machine. Everything might continue functioning for a while, but eventually, the system would break down. The first major breakdown came when a trade dispute erupted between the Korathi and the Vextai. The issue was simple enough. The Korathi claimed exclusive mining rights to a former human asteroid belt, while the Vextai argued that their bioships had been using the resources for decades. In the past, human mediators would have found a compromise within days, without human intervention. The dispute escalated quickly. The Korathi sent warships to secure the asteroid belt. The Vextai responded by dispatching their own biofleet. Within weeks, what should have been a minor disagreement had become a military standoff. General Tolmos watched the situation develop with growing concern. The Aquarian Republic had always relied on peaceful resolution of conflicts, but the established diplomatic procedures seemed inadequate without human facilitators. The Korathi were too aggressive, the Vextai too alien in their thinking, and the Zephyrians too focused on legal precedents to find practical solutions. "We need to intervene," Tolmos told Elder Finney during an emergency council meeting. "This conflict could spread to other systems. With what authority?" Finney replied. "The humans were the ones who had the trust of all species. Without them, who will listen to us?" The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. The humans had been more than just another species in the galactic community. They had been the translators, the mediators, the ones who could speak to anyone and find common ground. Their absence left a void that no other species seemed able to fill. As the Koratha-Vextai standoff continued, other problems began to surface. Trade negotiations became more difficult without human interpreters who understood not just languages but cultural contexts. Scientific collaborations fell apart when species couldn't communicate their ideas effectively. Even simple maintenance tasks became complicated when different species had to work together. Without human coordinators, the galaxy was learning a harsh lesson about interdependence. The humans had been so good at their role that others had taken them for granted. Now, with their mysterious disappearance, the true scope of their contribution was becoming clear, but it was too late to appreciate what they had lost. The humans were gone, and the galaxy would have to learn to function without them. The question was whether it could survive the learning process. 1 year had passed since the humans vanished, and the galaxy was at war. Admiral Grixton stood on his command deck, watching as Korathi battleships exchanged fire with Vextai. Bio-ships in the shadow of Kepler 442, the system had once been. Home to a thriving human research station, but now it was just another battlefield in an escalating conflict that showed no signs of ending. "Target their neural clusters," Grixton ordered his weapons officer. "Disrupt their hive communications." The Korathi fleet unleashed a barrage of plasma cannons, their brilliant blue energy tearing through the organic hulls of the Vextai vessels. But the bioships adapted quickly, their living armor healing damage. Even as new wounds appeared, the Vextai responded with swarms of biodrones, small creatures that attached themselves to Korathi ships and began eating through their metal hulls. War Commander Vexal had been promoted to Supreme Military Leader after the previous commander died in the first major battle. He had spent months trying to understand why this conflict was so different from previous wars. The Korathi had fought many enemies before, but they had always been able to predict their opponents' moves, to find weaknesses and exploit them. The Vextai were different. Their hive mind structure made them impossible to negotiate with, and their biotechnology adapted to every Korathi tactic. Without human mediators to facilitate communication, the two species had no way to de-escalate the conflict. Each battle only made both sides more determined to destroy the other. Hive mind Zaraneth experienced the war differently. Through thousands of bio-neural connections, she felt every death, every injury, every moment of pain as her children died in the void of space. But she also felt their collective rage, their shared determination to claim the resources that the Korathi had stolen from former human territories. The collective had never been a warlike species, but they were adaptable. Each battle taught them new ways to modify their bioships, new strategies for overwhelming their enemies. They began creating specialized war forms, creatures designed specifically for combat rather than the peaceful exploration and research that had been their original purpose. The war had started over mining rights to a single asteroid belt, but it had quickly spread to encompass dozens of systems. Without human diplomats to contain the conflict, every minor skirmish became a major battle. Every victory demanded revenge, and every defeat required retaliation. The Aquarian Republic found itself forced to choose sides. Elder Finney had hoped to remain neutral, but Korathi and Vextai forces were fighting dangerously close to Aquarian space. General Tolmos advised military intervention, but the Aquarian Council was divided. "We are a peaceful people," Elder Finney argued during an emergency session. "We have no experience with galactic warfare. Then we must learn quickly," General Tolmos replied. "The Korathi and Vextai are destroying everything in their path. If we don't act, they will bring their war to our worlds." The debate continued for weeks while the war raged around them. Finally, when a Vextai bioship attacked an Aquarian merchant vessel, the Republic was forced to act. General Tolmas reluctantly ordered the mobilization of the Aquarian fleet. Their sleek vessels designed for exploration now hastily retrofitted with weapon systems, the Zephyrians, watched the growing conflict with increasing alarm. Council Chairman Veltar had called for peace negotiations, but neither the Korathi nor the Vextai would agree to talks. The democratic processes that had served the Zephyrians well for centuries seemed inadequate when dealing with species that had no interest in compromise. Dr. Kolorin worked frantically in his laboratory, trying to understand what had gone wrong. He had studied the patterns of galactic conflict for decades, and he knew that wars like this didn't just happen. There were always underlying causes, always factors that could be addressed through diplomacy and negotiation, but as he reviewed the data, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every major conflict in the past century had been resolved through human intervention. The humans had possessed an almost supernatural ability to find common ground between opposing species, to understand what each side really wanted and find ways to satisfy everyone. They were the immune system, Dr. Colin whispered to himself. As the realization hit him, they prevented conflicts from spreading, contained problems before they became wars. The evidence was overwhelming. The trade war of 2341 had been resolved when human negotiators found a way for both sides to profit from the same resources. The territorial dispute of 2356 had ended when humans suggested a sharing arrangement that satisfied all parties. The religious conflicts of 2367 had been calmed when human scholars found common elements in different belief systems. In every case, the humans had acted as mediators, translators, and problem solvers. They had been so good at their role that other species had forgotten how to resolve conflicts without them. Now, with the humans gone, the galaxy was learning what happened when its immune system failed. The war continued to escalate. The Korathi developed new weapons designed specifically to target Vextai bioships. The Vextai created new war forms that could survive in the vacuum of space and tear apart metal hulls with their claws. The Aquarians built defensive stations around their worlds, hoping to protect their people from the spreading conflict. Even the peaceful Zephyrians began to militarize. Supreme Leader Nexfer had seized power in a military coup, arguing that democratic processes were too slow to deal with the current crisis. The Zephyrian fleet, once used only for exploration and peaceful contact, was being converted into a war machine. The galaxy's economy collapsed as trade routes became battlefields. Worlds that had depended on imported food began to starve. Medical supplies couldn't reach colonies that needed them. The complex network of interdependence that had connected hundreds of species was breaking down as each group focused only on survival. Dr. Kolorin tried to warn his government about the larger implications. This isn't just about the Korathi and Vextai, he told Council Chairman Veltar. The humans were maintaining the entire galactic ecosystem. Without them, everything is falling apart, but his warnings were ignored. The Zephyrians were too busy preparing for war to listen to abstract theories about galactic sociology. Supreme Leader Nexfer ordered increased military production and began forming alliances with other species, choosing sides in a conflict. That was consuming the galaxy. The war had become self-sustaining. Each battle created new grievances, new reasons for revenge. The Korathi and Vextai could no longer remember what they had originally been fighting about. They only knew that they hated each other and would not stop until their enemies were destroyed. In the abandoned human territories, automated systems continued their work. Fusion reactors powered empty cities, communication networks carried no messages, and research stations pursued experiments that no one would ever complete. The humans had built their civilization to last, but they had built it for a galaxy that could learn to live together. Without them, that galaxy was destroying itself, one battle at a time. 3 years had passed since the humans vanished and the galaxy was dying. Korathi scholar Hexana crouched in the ruins of New Terra, carefully brushing dust from a damaged data terminal. Around her, the abandoned human city stretched like a graveyard, its empty buildings testament to a civilization that had simply ceased to exist. "Be careful with those files," warned her research partner, Zephyrian scientist Polak. "Some of the data cores are still active, but they're degrading rapidly." The joint archaeological mission had been Dr. Kohler's idea. With the galaxy tearing itself apart, he had convinced the remaining academic institutions to fund one last expedition to human territories. If they could understand what had happened to the humans, perhaps they could find a way to stop the endless wars that were consuming everything. Hexana had volunteered despite the danger. As a Korathi, she was technically an enemy of the Zephyrians, but the old alliances meant nothing now. The Korathi Empire had fractured into competing warlords after War Commander Thexal died in a bioweapon attack. The Zephyrian Republic had become a military dictatorship under Supreme Leader Nexfer. Traditional enemies now worked together because they had no choice. The team also included Aquarian refugee Marlon, whose homeworld had been destroyed in the crossfire between Korathi and Vextai forces. Even a Vextai defector named Kalinash had joined them, one of the few individuals who had somehow broken free from the collective's hive mind control. "I've found something," Polak called out from across the research facility. "It's a secure archive, but the encryption is unlike anything I've seen." The team gathered around the terminal as Polak worked to access the files. The security system was sophisticated, but it seemed designed to eventually allow access rather than prevent it permanently. After several hours of careful work, the archive opened to reveal thousands of documents, video recordings, and data. Files. These are personal logs, Hexana realized as she began scanning the contents. Diary entries, private communications, research notes, the first files they examined were routine enough. Human researchers documenting their experiments. Diplomats recording their negotiations, ordinary citizens writing about their daily lives. But as they dug deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. "Look at this," Marlon said, pointing to a document. "Dated just weeks before the humans disappeared. It's a report by someone named Ben Taylor. Describing secret meetings between human leaders, the report detailed discussions about something called the Prometheus Protocol, a plan that involved humanity's most senior officials. The language was carefully coded, but the implications were clear. The humans had been preparing for something, some kind of massive operation that would require the cooperation of their entire species. Kilanash, speaking with the strange dual voice that marked former collective members, added his own discovery. These medical records show unusual patterns. Humans were undergoing some kind of treatment, something that affected their neural pathways. The evidence painted a picture of a species preparing for a coordinated action on a scale never before attempted. Every human settlement had been involved. Every ship and station. The logs showed supply movements, personnel transfers, and resource allocations that suggested a massive undertaking. They were planning to leave, Polak concluded. But not just leave. They were planning something much bigger. The breakthrough came when Hexana discovered a hidden partition in the archive, protected by even more sophisticated security. Inside, they found the personal logs of President Kate Sullivan, the leader of the Human Federation, and Dr. Alex Murphy, one of humanity's most brilliant scientists. The first entry was dated 6 months before the disappearance. President Sullivan's voice carried a weight of terrible knowledge as she spoke to the camera in her private office. "The threat is real," she said, her face showing the strain of sleepless nights. "Dr. Murphy's calculations are correct. If we don't act, the entire galaxy will be consumed within a decade." The logs revealed the existence of something called the Devourers, entities from another dimension that fed on conflict and chaos. Dr. Murphy had discovered traces of their influence. In the quantum foam that surrounded the galaxy, subtle distortions that grew stronger whenever large-scale wars occurred. "They're not just random monsters," Dr. Murphy explained in one of his recordings. "They're drawn to civilizations that tear themselves apart. Every battle, every act of hatred, every moment of despair makes them stronger. The humans had been monitoring the Devourers for decades, secretly tracking their attempts to break through into normal space. The breakthrough had come when human scientists realized that the entities were using emotional energy as a kind of dimensional anchor, allowing them to gradually weaken the barriers between realities. "We've run the simulations 1,000 times," President Sullivan said in another log. "If the current conflicts continue, if the galaxy tears itself apart through war, the Devourers will have enough energy to break through completely." The humans had faced an impossible choice. They could reveal the threat to the other species, but centuries of galactic history suggested that such a revelation would only create more conflict. The Korathi would want to fight the Devourers directly, the Vextai would try to study them, and the Zephyrians would form committees to debate the proper response. "We could try to explain," Dr. Murphy said in one of his final recordings. "But by the time they understand and agree on a response, it will be too late. The Devourers will be here, and nothing will be able to stop them." Instead, the humans had chosen a different path. The Prometheus Protocol was a plan to use humanity's unique neural patterns as a kind of dimensional seal, preventing the Devourers from entering normal space. It would require the voluntary sacrifice of every human being, their life energy channeled into maintaining the barriers between dimensions. "We know what this means," President Sullivan said, tears streaming down her face. "We know that the other species will think we simply abandoned them. They'll probably celebrate our disappearance, at least at first." The logs detailed the careful preparations for the protocol. Human scientists had developed the technology to convert biological consciousness into pure energy, creating a permanent barrier that would hold the Devourers at bay. Every human would participate voluntarily, understanding that their sacrifice would save billions of lives across the galaxy. "We're not dying," Dr. Murphy explained in his final entry. "We're becoming something else, something that can protect the galaxy from a threat they'll never even know existed." The archaeological team sat in stunned silence as they finished reviewing the files. The humans hadn't abandoned the galaxy or fled to another dimension. They had sacrificed themselves to save everyone else, knowing that their heroism would never be recognized or appreciated. "The wars," Hexana whispered, understanding finally dawning. "They knew that our conflicts would weaken the barriers. They sacrificed themselves to buy us time, but the team realized with growing horror that the human sacrifice was being wasted. The galaxy was still tearing itself apart, still feeding the very forces that the humans had died to contain. The Devourers were growing stronger with each battle, and the barriers that humanity had created with their lives were beginning to fail. The galaxy had perhaps 2 years before the seals broke completely, and the true enemy would finally arrive. 5 years had passed since the humans vanished, and the galaxy was dying faster than anyone had imagined. Dr. Colleran stood in his makeshift laboratory on the ruins of Nexus Prime, surrounded by the last remaining scientists from across the galaxy. The great space station that had once been the heart of galactic civilization was now a broken shell, its corridors filled with refugees and its halls echoing with the sounds of distant battles. The archaeological team's discovery on New Terra had changed everything, but it had also come too late. The evidence of humanity's sacrifice and the threat of the Devourers had been shared with the surviving governments, but few leaders had believed it. Those who did believe found themselves powerless to stop the wars that were tearing the galaxy apart. "The dimensional readings are getting worse," reported Dr. Ithka, a Korathi physicist who had abandoned her homeworld when it fell to Vextai bioweapons. Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much death and destruction. "The barriers are failing faster than our models predicted," former Hive Node Ziral, one of the few Vextai who had broken free from the collective's control, added her own disturbing observations. "My people have changed," she said, her pale features showing the strain of existence outside the hive mind. "They are creating new war forms, things designed only to kill and destroy." The collective has forgotten its original purpose. The galaxy had indeed forgotten its purpose. The Korathi Empire no longer existed as a unified force. Different warlords controlled different sectors, each claiming to be the true heir to Korathi glory. They fought each other as often as they fought the Vextai. their battles spreading destruction across dozens of worlds. The Vextai collective had become something monstrous. Without the moderating influence of peaceful species, they had evolved into pure war machines. Their bioships had grown larger and more deadly, their war forms more savage and efficient. They no longer sought to expand their territory or gather resources. They existed only to fight and consume. The Aquarian Republic had collapsed entirely. General Tolmas was dead, killed in a desperate last stand to protect the Aquarian homeworld. The survivors were scattered across the galaxy as refugees, their peaceful culture unable to adapt to the constant warfare that had become the new reality. Even the Zephyrians, once the most stable democracy in the galaxy, had fallen into chaos. Supreme Leader Nexver ruled through fear and military force, but his control was slipping. Different Zephyrian factions fought each other in the streets of their cities, each claiming to represent the true path forward. The emotional energy from all these conflicts is feeding the Devourers, Dr. Colleran explained to his small team of researchers. Every death, every act of hatred, every moment of despair makes them stronger. The human sacrifice is being undone by our inability to stop fighting. The team had been working desperately to understand the human technology that maintained the dimensional barriers. The archives on New Terra had provided theoretical knowledge, but the practical application remained beyond their grasp. Human engineering had always operated on principles that other species found difficult to understand. "Look at this," said Polak, the Zephyrian scientist, pointing to a complex diagram on his display. The humans weren't just using technology to create the barriers. They were using their consciousness itself, their thoughts and emotions. As building blocks, the revelation was both inspiring and terrifying. The humans had literally transformed themselves into a living shield, their combined will and determination, holding back forces that could destroy reality itself. But that shield was weakening as the galaxy descended into madness. Dr. Ithka had detected the first signs of dimensional breakthrough 3 months earlier. Small tears in space-time that appeared during the largest battles, moments when the barriers between dimensions grew thin enough for something else to peek through. The readings were subtle, but they matched the theoretical predictions in the human archives. "We need to stop the wars," Zaral said, though her voice held little hope. "If we could convince the remaining factions to cease fighting, we might be able to stabilize the barriers. With what authority?" Dr. Colleran replied bitterly. "Who would listen to us? The warlords care only about conquest, the collective knows only war, and the survivors are too desperate to trust anyone." The team had tried to contact the remaining leaders, sharing their evidence and pleading for peace. Some had listened politely before returning to their battles. Others had accused the scientists of spreading enemy propaganda. A few had even suggested that the threat of the Devourers was a human trick, a delayed weapon designed to manipulate the galaxy even after their disappearance. The breakthrough came when Hexana discovered additional files in the human archives. These contained detailed readings of dimensional stability from the period just before humanity's sacrifice. The data showed that the Devourers had been on the verge of breaking through 5 years earlier, held back only by humanity's last-minute intervention. "They were almost here?" Hexana said, her voice filled with awe and terror. "The humans saved us with hours to spare, but the files also contained something else. Instructions for emergency procedures if the barriers ever began to fail. The humans had anticipated that their sacrifice might not be permanent, that the other species might continue fighting despite their example. Emergency Protocol 7, Dr. Colleran read aloud. If dimensional barriers show signs of failure, remaining consciousness can be augmented through voluntary neural linking of surviving species. The protocol was a desperate measure, a way for the surviving species to add their own mental energy to the barriers that humanity had created. It would require unprecedented cooperation between former enemies, a joining of minds that had never been attempted on such a scale. "It could work," Polak said, though uncertainty colored his voice. "If we could convince enough individuals from different species to participate, we might be able to reinforce the barriers, but the challenges were enormous. The neural linking technology existed only in theory, and building it would require resources and cooperation that seemed impossible in the current climate of war. More importantly, it would require trust between species that had been trying to destroy each other for years. Dr. Ithka pulled up the latest dimensional readings on her screen. The numbers were worse than ever, showing multiple stress points, where the barriers were close to failing completely. Red warning indicators flashed across the display like countdown timers to the galaxy's doom. "We have perhaps 6 months," she announced. "Maybe less if the fighting intensifies." The scientists looked around at each other, representatives of species that had once worked together in peace. They were the last hope for a galaxy that had forgotten how to hope, the final guardians of knowledge that could save everyone or damn them all. Outside their laboratory, the war continued. Ships exploded in the darkness of space. Worlds burned under the fury of weapons designed to kill entire populations, and beings that had once called each other friends now fought with the desperation of survival. The Devourers were coming, and the galaxy was almost ready to welcome them. 7 years had passed since the humans vanished, and the galaxy faced its final hour. Dr. Kohlerin stood on the observation deck of the last functioning space station in the Sol system, watching as reality itself began to tear apart. The dimensional barriers that humanity had created with their lives were finally failing, and through the growing cracks in space-time, something alien and hungry was pushing through. The Devourers had arrived. They appeared first as shadows that moved wrong, darkness that bent light in impossible ways. Then came the whispers, voices that spoke directly into the minds of every living being, promising power and glory and the sweet release of eternal conflict. The few remaining ships in the area reported their crews going mad, turning on each other with sudden violence that served no purpose except destruction. "The neural linking array is ready," reported Dr. Ithka, though her voice shook with exhaustion and fear. The Korathi scientist had worked without sleep for 3 days building the device that represented their last hope. Around her, the other survivors made final preparations for what they all knew was probably a suicide mission. The alliance that had formed in the ruins of galactic civilization was small but determined. Only a few hundred individuals from across the galaxy had answered the call when Dr. Kohlerin broadcast the truth about the Devourers and humanity's sacrifice. Former enemies stood together now, united by desperation and the knowledge that they were the galaxy's final defenders. Palek, the Zephyrian researcher, calibrated the quantum resonance fields that would allow different neural patterns to connect. Beside him, Ziral used her knowledge of collective biotechnology to create organic interfaces that could bridge the gap between mechanical and biological consciousness. Admiral Grixton had arrived 3 days earlier with the last survivors of the Korathi fleet. The proud warrior looked older than his years, his face scarred by battles against enemies that no longer seemed to matter. He had fought the Vextai for so long that he had forgotten why the war started, but now he stood ready to link his mind with theirs if it meant saving what remained of the galaxy. Elder Finney represented the scattered Aquarian refugees. The gentle being had watched his people's peaceful civilization burn in the fires of galactic war, but he had not lost hope. If the neural linking worked, if they could somehow add their consciousness to the barriers that humanity had created, perhaps some meaning could be found in all the death and destruction. Even Hive Mind Zaraneth had come, though she arrived not as a conqueror but as a penitent. The Vextai leader had seen what her people had become in their endless hunger for war, and she knew that only cooperation could save them now. The collective's bio-neural technology would be crucial for the linking process, but using it meant abandoning the very nature of what the Vextai had always been. "The dimensional readings are critical," Hexana announced from her monitoring station. "We have perhaps an hour before the barriers collapse completely." Through the station's viewports, they could see the signs of the Devourer's approach. Space itself was changing, becoming fluid and wrong. Stars flickered like dying candles, their light consumed by entities that existed beyond normal understanding. The few remaining worlds in the system showed massive energy discharges as their populations turned on each other with supernatural fury. Dr. Colrin activated the emergency broadcast system, sending out one final message to any survivors who might be listening. This is Dr. Colrin of the Zephyrian Republic, broadcasting from Sol Station. If you can hear this, know that we tried. Know that the humans died to save us all, and we failed to honor their sacrifice, the neural linking array. Hummed to life, its crystalline structure glowing with the combined energies of a dozen different technologies. Human quantum processors worked alongside Korathi plasma conduits. Vexti bio-neural networks interfaced with Zephyrian democratic consciousness algorithms, and Aquarian harmony protocols tied everything together, beginning the linking process. Dr. Ithka announced, "Remember, we need to focus not on our differences, but on our shared desire to protect what remains one by one." The volunteers connected to the array. Admiral Grixton was first, his warrior's mind adding strength and determination to the growing network. Elder Finney followed, bringing the Aquarian gift for peaceful cooperation. Hive mind Zaraneth contributed the collective's ability to share consciousness across vast distances. As each mind joined the network, the participants began to understand what humanity had experienced in their final moments. They felt the weight of an entire species' consciousness focused on a single purpose, the incredible strength that came from billions of minds working in perfect harmony, but they also felt the barriers themselves, the invisible walls that humanity had built with their lives to keep the devourers at bay. The barriers were beautiful and terrible, woven from human hopes and dreams and determination. They pulsed with the echoes of every human who had ever lived, every child who had laughed, every parent who had sacrificed for their family, every explorer who had reached for the stars. "I can feel them," whispered Polek, his voice filled with awe. "The humans are still here, still fighting." The revelation hit them all at the same moment. Humanity hadn't simply died to create the barriers. They had become the barriers their consciousness transformed into a living shield that had protected the galaxy for 7 years. Every moment of those years, the spirits of billions of humans had stood guard against an enemy that no one else even knew existed. But the human consciousness was fading, worn down by years of constant vigilance and weakened by the galaxy's endless conflicts. The wars and hatred had fed the devourers, making them stronger while simultaneously draining the energy from humanity's sacrifice. "We can help them," Dr. Colrin realized. "We can add our strength to theirs." The linking process intensified as more volunteers joined the network. Scientists and soldiers, diplomats and refugees, former enemies and unlikely allies all connected their minds to the barriers that humanity had created. They felt the human consciousness welcome them, felt the gratitude and relief of a species that had been fighting alone for so long. The devourers sensed the change and pressed their attack. Reality shook as they threw themselves against the reinforced barriers, their alien hunger frustrated by the renewed resistance. The linked minds felt the assault like physical blows, but they held firm. The battle lasted for hours that felt like centuries. The combined consciousness of the galaxy's survivors fought alongside the ghosts of humanity, their different perspectives and abilities creating a barrier stronger than anything that had come before. When it was over, when the devourers finally retreated to whatever dimension had spawned them, less than 100 beings remained alive in the entire galaxy. They built the memorial on Earth, in the ruins of humanity's birth world. The inscription was simple, carved in the languages of every surviving species. "We didn't leave without a word. We left without goodbye, because we knew you'd try to stop us from saving you." The galaxy survived, but it would never be the same. In trying to claim what humanity had built, the other species had destroyed what humanity had protected. They had learned too late that some gifts are only recognized in their absence, and some heroes are only mourned after they're gone. But in the end, they had learned. And perhaps that was enough.